So in this video, we're going to be going over rational numbers, and equations. So just to outline this video for you, first we're going to be going over rational numbers, which includes learning to write fractions as decimals and vice versa, and then learning how to write mixed fractions as improper fractions. Then we're going to go ahead and go over some fraction arithmetic, which includes learning how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. And then we're going to go over how to solve equations that contain fractions. So let's go ahead and jump right in and talk about rational numbers. So a rational number is a number that can be written as a quotient of two integers. So can be written as a quotient of two integers. So the word quotient also means divide, which we all know that fractions are just another way of writing division. So fractions are rational numbers. So let's go ahead and just do a couple of examples of writing fractions as decimals. So if you have a fraction, we'll say 9/15, and you want to convert that to a decimal. What you're going to do is you're just going to perform some division on this. So 9 divided by 15. We're only going to go out 2 decimal places for this. So we know it's going to be 0 there, and then for 90, 15 goes in 6 times. We get 0, 0, so we're done there. So 9/15 is equal to 0.6 in decimal form. Now, if you wanted to go back the other way, you would just take this 0.6 and since the 6 is in the 10th spot, this is 6/10. So 6/10. And then you can just reduce that by dividing top and bottom by 2, which is 3/5. And if we come back up here and we reduce this fraction by dividing top and bottom by 3, we're going to get 3/5, which is the same answer there and there. So to get fraction to a decimal, you just perform division on it. To get from a decimal to a fraction, you have to pay attention to which places your decimals, the values of your decimal lie in. So if we had 0.2419, we'll just go ahead and do 0.241. This is going to be your tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So you're going to go ahead and do 241 over 1,000 because this ends in the thousandths place. So, and then you could just go on and reduce that if you wanted to, or you can just use that as your equivalent fraction. All right, so the next thing we need to learn how to do with fractions is to take a mixed fraction and convert it to an improper fraction. So a mixed fraction is a fraction that has a whole number that is attached to some fraction, whereas an improper fraction is written like this, where your top value is larger than your bottom value. So for example, a mixed fraction could be 3.5. And an improper fraction could be 21/3 because the top is greater than the bottom. So if you want to go from a mixed fraction to an improper fraction, all you're going to do is take your bottom times your whole number, add your top number, and place that value on top of your bottom number. So 3.5 would be 2 times 3 plus 1 all over 2. So you'd end up with 7/2. Again, if we do another one, if we had 5 and 5/10, let's do 11ths. Again, you're going to take this times here, add that, place it all over the bottom. So 11 times 5 plus 5 all over 11. So 5 and 5/11ths is equal to 55 plus 5 over 11, which is 60 over 11. And that would be your answer there. So let's go ahead now and talk a little bit about fraction arithmetic. So if you want to add fractions, you have to have the same denominator. For the fractions you're adding together. So for example, if we had 7/10 and 5/10 and we wanted to add those together, because they've got the same denominator, then we just go ahead and we add these top ones and stick it over this similar denominator. So it's going to be 7 plus 5 all over 10. So that would be 12 over 10. All right, but if you had different denominators, say if we had 7 over 10 plus 5 over 8, we'll say, we've got to find a common denominator here. So find common denominator. And so how you're going to do that is you've got to find something, you got to find a multiple that these both have in common. And if you remember, previously, we learned about least common multiples. So if you remember, to find your least common multiple, we're going to go ahead and do a prime factorization on both of these numbers. And then we line them up horizontally. Box our similarities. And then multiply by our non-boxed, 5 times 2 times 2, and then times by our box. So if we do that math, we get 40 as our least common multiple. So we want our new denominator now to be 40 here and 40 here. So in order to turn 10 into 40, we have to multiply it by 4. So 10 times 4, and of course if we times it to the bottom, we've got to times it to the top. And now to get 8 times what equals 40? 8 times 5 equals 40. So of course then we've got to multiply the top by 5 as well. So we're going to get that equals 7 times 4 is 28 all over 40 plus 25 over 40, which is going to be equal to 28 plus 25 all over 40, which is going to be 53 all over 40. And that's going to be our answer. So again, you want to find your least common multiple. Make that your new denominator and then perform your addition. And same goes for subtraction as well. So if we had 7/10 minus 5/8, again, you would do 7 times 4 all over, 10 times 4 minus 5 times 5 all over 8 times 5, which is going to be 28 over 40 minus 25 over 40, which is 3 over 40. All right, so again, find your common denominator, and then you can go ahead and just subtract those top and place it over your common denominator. Now, if you want to multiply fractions, all you're going to do is multiply the top values, and that's going to be your new top, and then multiply your bottom values, and that's going to be your new bottom. So if we have 2/3, and we're multiplying that by 1/2, all you're going to do is do 2 times 1 over 3 times 2. So 2 over 6. Now, a little trick that you can use so that way you don't have to simplify after that. You can just kind of simplify at the same time that you're multiplying. Because to simplify this, you just divide top and bottom by 2, and you'd be left with 1/3. But at this stage here, you can go ahead and cross out any pairs that you have. So that way you would be left with 1/3, and then it's already simplified for you. Just a quick trick for you there. So let's see, if we do another one, let's say 4/9 times 5/12. It's going to be 4 times 5 all over 9 times 12. And again, you can go ahead and simplify at this stage if you want. So we know that 4 goes into 12 3 times, and there's just 1 left up there. So again, 12 divided by 4 equals 3. So again, then we'll end up with 1 times 5 over 9 times 3, which is 5/27, which is a lot easier than if you just did this math straight out right here. You're going to end up with 20 over 108, and then you have to go through and do your simplifying steps. But if you just cancel them out right then and there, then you end up with a simplified answer for you already. Again, let's just go ahead and do one more of those to make sure you've got it. So if we had 5/21 times 14 15ths, we're going to end up with 5 times 14 all over 21 times 15. Now, for me, I can automatically look at this and go, okay, I can divide this by 7 and divide this by 7. And then I can divide this by 5 and divide this by 5. And so if I did that, 14 divided by 7 is 2. 21 divided by 7 is 3. 5 divided by 5 is 1. And 15 divided by 5 is 3. So you'd end up with 1 times 2 over 3 times 3, which is going to be 2/9. However, if you can't just pick that out automatically, you can go ahead and do a prime factorization on all of these numbers. So 5, 14, 21, and 15. So 5 is already done because we just have 5, 2, 7, 3, 7, 3, 5. And then you can go ahead and place these prime factorization numbers back into your fraction. So for 5, we just had 5. For 14, we had 2 times 7. And then for 21, we've got 3 times 7. And then for 15, we've got 3 times 5. And then you can just cross off any pairs. So 7 and 7, and then 5 and 5. So you're left with 2 over 3 times 3, which is 2/9, which again gives you the same answer. So it doesn't matter which way you do it, whichever way you're more comfortable with. I feel like this way is a little bit more straightforward until you can just look at something like this and start picking off common things that they can be divided by, which you will get to this point eventually. But if you can't recognize it just by looking at it, go ahead and just run a prime factorization on everything. You can just cancel things out. Or if you don't want to do that and you feel like that's too much of a hassle, you can just go ahead and do 5 times 14 over 21 times 15 and then simplify after that. These methods are just used so you don't have to do your simplifying afterwards. You just kind of do your simplifying during your multiplication process. But again, it's totally up to you. Whatever you're most comfortable with, that's the way you want to do it. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about division. Now, division is a little bit different than multiplication in that you're going to use something called a reciprocal, which is I think that's how it's spelled. Which is when you flip the top and bottom of your fraction. So for example, if you had the fraction 2/3, its reciprocal is equal to 3/2. So again, you just take the bottom, put it on the top, take the top, put it on the bottom. So that's your reciprocal. So when you're dividing, you actually just multiply by the reciprocal. So if you had 2/3 divided by 4/5, that's going to be the same thing as 2/3 times the reciprocal of 4/5, which is 5/4. So then you can just go 2 times 5 over 3 times 4. It's going to be equal to 10/12, which again can be reduced. You divide top and bottom by 2, 5/6. And if you wanted to do that simplification before you did your multiplication, you just come to this step and you know that 4 can be divided by 2, and that's going to equal 2. 2 divided by 2 is equal to 1. So you'd be left with 1 times 5 over 3 times 2, which is 5/6. So again, if we did another division, let's look at 5/9 divided by 1/3. That's going to be the same thing as 5/9 times the reciprocal of 1/3, which is 3 wholes, or 3/1. So it's going to be equal to 5 times 3/9 times 1, which is 15/9. Divide top and bottom by 3, you're going to end up with 5/3. And again, if you wanted to simplify during your process, you would take this 5 times 3 all over 9 times 1. And you know that 9 is really 3 times 3, so you can go ahead and replace that with 3 times 3. And one of your 3's will cancel out. So you'll be left with 5/3. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about equations that have fractions. You're going to solve them just the way we learned previously of solving equations, except now you're going to use your rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division for fractions. So if we have 1/2 x minus 2/3 equals 4/9, we're going to go ahead and add 2/3 to both sides. So you're going to be left with 1/2 x on this side is equal to 4/9 plus 2/3. You've got to come up with a common denominator here and here. We know that 3 times 3 equals 9, so we'll just go ahead and change this fraction here. So 1/2 x equals 4/9 plus times top and bottom here by 3. So you're going to get 6/9. So 1/2 x equals 4 plus 6/9. So 1/2 x equals 10/9. Now here we've got to divide by 1/2 on both sides, which when we divide, remember that's the same thing as multiplying by its inverse. So we're going to have 2/1 times 1/2 x equals 10/9 times 2/1. So here 2's will cancel, 1's will cancel. You'll be left with x on this side. Here you're going to have 10 times 2 over 9 times 1. So x is going to equal 20 over 9. And it's really as simple as that. You follow the same steps you would in solving a regular equation, except now you just use the rules that you learned about fractions. If you have any further questions on this, head over to our homework help page. Or to our tutoring page, and we'll be able to get you help there.